There was new video released yesterday showing Nick Reiner calmly strolling near his parents' home hours before the murders. This was obtained by the New York Post. Let's take a look at it.
A new video released yesterday is adding another chilling layer to the Nick Reiner case. The footage, obtained by the New York Post, shows Nick calmly walking near his parents' home just hours before the murders. At first glance, it looks ordinary, just a sidewalk. Nick strolling along with a bag over his left shoulder. No rush, no panic, just unsettling calm. 5 days have now passed since the heartbreaking tragedy at the Brentwood home of legendary filmmaker Rob Reiner and his wife, Michelle. Hollywood is still reeling, and as new details emerge, the story only grows darker. A preliminary forensic report now suggests the possible moment Nick may have attacked. Investigators describe multiple severe injuries, including a deep wound across Rob's neck, one that they say carried a chilling message. Every new detail reveals another layer of pain, chaos, and unanswered questions. Authorities believe the chain of events may have started at Conan O'Brien's Christmas party. Witnesses there reportedly noticed Nick acting erratic and unstable. What began as a heated argument may have quietly spiraled into something far more disturbing. After the party, Nick allegedly left without incident, checked into a nearby hotel, and later used family inheritance money to hire Alan Jackson, one of the most powerful defense attorneys in the country. That move alone left many people stunned by how calculated it seemed. Investigators are now carefully reconstructing the timeline. According to the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office, the attack likely happened sometime between midnight and the early morning hours. Between around 12 a.m. and 6 a.m., authorities believe Nick left his own room and entered the main house, where his parents were asleep in their master bedroom. There were no signs of forced entry. He had keys. He knew the house intimately, every hallway, every room. What happened next remains the most horrifying part of the case. Another video
what that young woman, Romy, saw when she discovered her parents, and Art has seen these too. Stabbing murders are the worst because it's not like TV, Megan, where somebody gets stabbed once with a knife and they fall down dead. That's what you see in the movies. In reality, they die from what's called exsanguination. That means they bleed to death, and that takes minutes, which means they are fighting, they're running around. And the rumor is, this is from multiple sources. I don't know if this is true, and we don't know the evidence yet. And of course, he's presumed innocent. But rumor is that he cut both of their throats.
Shows Nick later that night, walking past a gas station wearing a hat, bag still over his shoulder. He doesn't look frantic. He doesn't look out of control. He looks normal. This footage appears to be from before the murders, allegedly, and that calm demeanor only deepens the mystery. After the violent act, Nick reportedly left the house almost immediately. Whether he felt panic or an eerie sense of calm remains unknown. Around 4 a.m., security footage places him at the Pierside Hotel in Santa Monica, about a 20-minute drive from Brentwood. He checked into a modest room, paid quietly, and drew no attention. Staff later said he made no phone calls and may not have slept at all, as if completely detached from what had just happened. Later that afternoon, around 3:40 p.m., the nightmare was discovered. A massage therapist arrived for an appointment with Rob and Michelle, but received no response. Concerned, she contacted Roy, who rushed over with her boyfriend. When they entered the house, their world shattered. Rob was found lifeless in the master bedroom. Police were called immediately, and Michelle was soon found nearby, confirming everyone's worst fears. While investigators processed the scene, Nick was still moving through the city. Another video, this time from ABC News, showed
he was approaching people there, asking questions that, in that context, seemed confrontational, strange. Especially, are you famous? Asking people there, are you famous? So you can imagine a party of actual famous people and fame-adjacent people who are really used to strange behavior out in public, but here they are at a gathering of their peers at a party hosted by Conan. It was unsettling to see. So Bill Hader was one of the people he approached at the party. There was an awkward exchange, and made more awkward by the fact that he had met Hader earlier in the night. So when Rob had introduced him, so when he came up and asked him questions such as, "What's your name? Are you famous?" It was unsettling and described as scary from Hader's perspective.
Inside a convenience store, once again carrying a bag, slowly wandering the aisles. This footage is believed to be after the murders. He still doesn't appear deranged or visibly distressed. By around 9 p.m., surveillance cameras at an Arco gas station near Exposition Park caught Nick buying a sports drink. He looked restless, scanning the area, but calm enough to complete the purchase. Just minutes later, around 9:15 p.m., LAPD officers, working with U.S. Marshals, surrounded and arrested him nearby. He did not resist. He said nothing. The footage shows a young man with a hollow, exhausted stare, as if completely drained of emotion. Forensic teams later estimated that Rob and Michelle had died 3 to 4 hours before their bodies were discovered. That timeline only deepened the tragedy. Investigators also believe Nick may have attempted to clean himself up, possibly showering at the hotel. Still, evidence may have remained on his clothes or skin, and surveillance footage tracked his movements across Santa Monica. Experts believe the weapon used was likely taken from inside the home, possibly a kitchen knife or cleaver. Because Nick knew the layout of the house so well, investigators say he was able to move with chilling precision, turning a once-loving family home into a scene of unimaginable horror. Another disturbing video shows Nick surrendering on an LA street as police closed in. According to law enforcement, he went into custody willingly and did not resist. Officers at the scene appeared calm, not in a high-alert stance, reinforcing reports that Nick posed no immediate threat at the time of arrest.
And called the whole situation very complex and serious. Let's allow the system to move forward in a way it was designed. No one understood exactly what he was telegraphing, but he wants you to know this is very complex. Is it? And then there was this, which I thought was worth playing. Wall Street Journal reporter John Jurgensen had an interesting report yesterday on the party at Conan O'Brien's the night that Rob and Michelle were killed. They had been there and they had brought their son Nick, who by all accounts had been acting inappropriately, and he filled in some of those details in this report, which he then spoke about on CNN. SOT 3.
Forensic investigators later confirmed that both Rob and Michelle suffered multiple serious wounds, contradicting early reports that suggested only a single strike. Professor Joseph Scott Morgan, a forensic expert from Jacksonville State University, explained that repeated stabbing indicates deliberate intent and extreme physical force. These acts happen at very close range and require sustained effort. This wasn't a momentary loss of control. It was prolonged and intentional. Morgan also explained the difference between stab and slash wounds. Stabs are deeper and focused, while slashes are longer and more superficial. When both are present, it suggests a prolonged struggle fueled by rage and precision, not a sudden emotional snap. Injuries to the neck, in particular, are far more complex and brutal than movies portray, requiring control, strength, and close contact. What makes this even harder to process are early reports suggesting Rob and Michelle may have been in bed when the attack began. If true, it points to intimate knowledge of the home and their routines. Experts say such an attack could mean the attacker invaded their personal space in the most horrifying way, possibly even climbing onto the bed. The scene was described by specialists as overwhelming. Severe neck injuries led to catastrophic blood loss, along with multiple stab wounds. Every piece of evidence pointed to one grim conclusion. The attacker knew the home, had unrestricted access, and lived under the same roof. Perhaps the most unsettling detail of all came afterward. Nick Reiner allegedly used part of his parents' own inheritance to pay for his defense. The public reaction was swift and stunned. Questions immediately surfaced about how expensive this defense might be, especially given that Nick had no steady career and only minor film work tied to his father years ago. As this case continues to unfold, the heartbreak surrounding Rob and Michelle Reiner only grows deeper, and the questions surrounding Nick Reiner remain haunting. Alan Jackson, the attorney representing Nick Reiner, is not just any lawyer. He's one of the most elite and in-demand defense attorneys in the entire country. Jackson is known for taking only the most complex, high-profile cases, and his reputation alone comes with an enormous price tag. In past cases, even when he offered reduced fees, total legal costs reportedly still climbed to nearly $10 million.
Daily Mail reports from someone who says he knows the family and Nick well, that this person had just spoken with the other brother, Jake, within the past 24 hours since the murders, so it does appear to be close to them, saying Nick was a deeply troubled child who needed physical restraint for his rages from a very young age, that his issues began well before his teenage years, and thus we presume well before his drug use, that Jake, the other brother, is, quote, beyond himself with grief. Nick's uncontrollable anger was not new, said the friend. A lot of their quoting here. A lot of their fights had to do with him just doing something self-destructive and fighting back when they tried to help him. It did get physical sometimes, not talking punches, but restraining
For many
him.
watching this case unfold, that number represents a painful contradiction at the heart of this tragedy. A son accused of unimaginable violence is now defending himself using wealth created by the very parents he's accused of harming. And in Nick's case, Those costs are expected to rise even higher due to the seriousness of the charges and the relentless media attention surrounding every development. Even at a discounted rate, the legal expenses are far beyond what most people could ever afford. When reporters approached Alan Jackson outside the courthouse and asked who was paying the legal fees, he offered only a brief response, saying he couldn't comment. That silence immediately sparked intense speculation. Some believe Jackson might be taking the case pro bono because of its public visibility. Others whispered about private arrangements happening behind the scenes. Then, on December 18th, 2025, a bombshell revelation dropped. Multiple sources close to the Reiner family claimed that Nick's legal defense is being funded by the estate of Rob and Michelle Reiner, an estate estimated at around $200,000 million. According to insiders, the decision reportedly came from surviving relatives, including Jake and Roy Reiner. Despite their grief, they allegedly agreed to fund the defense in hopes of pursuing an argument centered on mental instability and diminished responsibility. The belief, according to these sources, is that placement in a secure psychiatric facility rather than a life sentence would be a more humane outcome, and possibly what Rob and Michelle themselves might have wanted for their son. Under California law, anyone convicted of killing someone cannot inherit from the victim's estate. However, legal experts explain that this law does not stop family members or estate executives from using estate funds to pay for legal defense before a verdict is reached. Legal analyst Sean Weisbart confirmed that while this is technically allowed during ongoing proceedings, it remains highly controversial. Some argue the estate executor could refuse such payments to avoid legal complications later. As of now, neither the family nor the court has officially confirmed the source of the money, leaving the public divided and full of questions about justice, loyalty, and morality. Then came the next chapter, Nick Reiner's first courtroom appearance. Facing 2 counts of first-degree homicide, along with aggravating circumstances due to multiple victims, Nick appeared before the Los Angeles County Court wearing a blue inmate uniform, a stark symbol of both protection and downfall. Standing beside him, as expected, was Alan Jackson. The hearing took place under tight restrictions. No live cameras were allowed, only adding to the mystery surrounding the case. Jackson requested that the formal arraignment be delayed so Nick could decide whether to enter a plea. The judge agreed, scheduling the next hearing for January 7th. Until then, Nick remains in custody at the Los Angeles County Jail. The only time the public heard Nick speak was when he quietly acknowledged his constitutional rights. The judge asked, "Mr. Reiner, do you waive your right to a speedy trial so the arraignment may continue on January 7th, 2026? Nick replied, calmly and without emotion, "Yes, Your Honor, I do." That was it. No explanation, no visible reaction, just a brief response that underscored how far this once privileged life has fallen. The hearing ended almost as quickly as it began, leaving the courtroom heavy with tension. Now, all eyes turned to January 7th, a date that could define everything. Before moving toward what many expect to be a historic trial, investigators revisited one of the most disturbing aspects of this story, Nick Reiner's long battle with addiction. Behind the fame and privilege was years of deep personal struggle. Born in 1993, Nick reportedly began experimenting with hard drugs around age 15, back in 2008. Heroin and cocaine entered his life early, sending him into a spiral that proved incredibly difficult to escape. As the son of filmmaker Rob Reiner and the grandson of comedy legend Carl Reiner, Nick grew up surrounded by fame, pressure, and expectations, an environment he reportedly found overwhelming and isolating. Rob and Michelle saw the warning signs early and sent Nick to rehab while he was still a teenager, but that was only the beginning. Over the years, Nick reportedly went through 17 to 18 rehab programs, trapped in a painful cycle of progress and relapse. Each attempt brought hope, followed by heartbreak. Despite everything, Rob and Michelle never gave up. They supported him emotionally, helped him find work, and even allowed him to move back into their Brentwood home so he could try to rebuild. Rob spent hours working with Nick on creative projects, hoping structure and purpose could help him heal. But addiction is relentless, and recovery remained fragile. That same home, meant to be a place of healing, would later become the center of an unimaginable tragedy. Friends recall Rob once saying that being a parent means never giving up on your child, no matter how far they fall. Tragically, that unwavering love ended with the son they tried to save, now accused of ending their lives. When Rob and Michelle eventually tried what friends described as tough love, Nick walked away and began drifting across the country, living in Maine, New Jersey, and Texas. He later described this period as his darkest years. Homeless at times and deeply addicted, he survived through luck, resilience, and dangerous street connections while his family watched, helplessly. In 2015, there was a brief moment of hope. At just 22, Nick stayed sober long enough to work with his father on Being Charlie, a semi-autobiographical film inspired by his struggle with addiction. For a while, it seemed like redemption was possible. Father and son reconnected, rebuilding trust. But by 2018, everything unraveled again. Nick relapsed heavily, nearly dying from a cocaine-related medical emergency during a flight. Not long after, he caused major damage to his parents' guest house, destroying furniture and electronics in what was described as a state of rage and confusion. That moment marked a breaking point. Rob and Michelle sent him back to rehab, hoping, once again, it might finally save him. And that painful history now sits at the center of a case that continues to haunt Hollywood and the nation.
Now, he was prosecuted. I was able to get him this was a while ago, but it was in the teens of years. But they were very uncooperative, and there was a prosecutor he's sitting there with the parents who were the victims, begging not to prosecute him at all, and he wants to give him 25 to life. And so, well, he couldn't give him 25 to life, but he could have given him 25 on the straight up assault one. And so they kind of split the difference and gave the kid, I don't know if it was 12 or 14 years in prison. So, the question people ask is what does Nick, brother and sister, want to see happen here? Who hired this fantastic, expensive, presumably lawyer?
Yeah, and who's paying for him?
Yeah, Meg, if you look at the online version this morning of the Wall Street Journal, there is a family photo of Rob, Michelle, and their children, and everyone's smiling except Nick.
Anyone calls me a Sally because I'm a snail, and I'm never gonna fail. And you know what? You're gonna have to bail me out of jail.
By 2020, Rob and Michelle Reiner made one last attempt to protect their son. They allowed Nick to move back into the Maine Brentwood house, hoping that keeping him close, supervised, and safe might finally help. But their hope was already fading. Friends later said Nick's behavior had grown increasingly erratic, and his parents were deeply worried about his mental health and ongoing substance abuse in the months leading up to the tragedy. Nick's story is a painful reminder that even endless love and sacrifice can't always stop someone from spiraling. And that raises one of the biggest questions in this case. Could addiction play a role in his defense? Nick's attorney, Alan Jackson, is known for carefully crafted strategies built around mental state and intent. Some believe the defense may argue that years of drug use impaired Nick's ability to fully control his actions that night. Witnesses at the Santa Monica Hotel described him as extremely high after the incident, something investigators later confirmed. But legally, intoxication alone doesn't equal insanity. Under California law, voluntary drug use rarely excuses responsibility. At best, it can slightly affect whether intent can be proven, which matters most in first-degree murder charges. Prosecutors, however, see it differently. They argue that retrieving a weapon and attacking after an argument shows awareness and planning. So while addiction may shape the emotional context, it's unlikely to absolve Nick. The upcoming trial will test where the line between addiction and accountability truly lies. The legal challenges facing Nick's defense are enormous. Investigators still don't know whether he brought the weapon or grabbed one from inside the house, but earlier arguments suggest possible planning. Even if drug use is presented as a mitigating factor, it carries little legal weight. If convicted of first-degree homicide with special circumstances, Nick could face life in prison without parole. Even without those enhancements, the sentence could still range from 25 years to life. Authorities have found no evidence of self-defense or accident. Experts describe the crime as driven by anger, emotion, or passion. And because the victims were beloved Hollywood figures, the case has drawn unprecedented attention. Potential witnesses reportedly include Conan O'Brien, Larry David, and Billy Crystal, names that could turn the trial into one of the most watched courtroom dramas since the O.J. Simpson or Menendez trials. The trial is expected to begin in late 2026 or early 2027, and insiders say a plea deal is unlikely. Prosecutors plan to rely heavily on forensic evidence, DNA, blood traces, surveillance footage, and the broader narrative leading up to that night. Nick's addiction, mental health, and behavior will be examined frame by frame. With both victims elderly and Nick only 32, the imbalance further weakens any self-defense claim. One of the most disturbing details involves reports of severe neck injuries, which suggest close-range, deliberate intent. If confirmed, that evidence could significantly strengthen the prosecution's case. Alan Jackson now faces immense pressure to construct any narrative that could reduce Nick's culpability. And then there's the jury. In Los Angeles County, jurors come from all backgrounds. Many may struggle to relate to Nick's extreme privilege. Will they see him as a victim of addiction and mental illness, or as someone who squandered every chance he was given? That question could ultimately decide his fate.
If your kid is going through rough times, the parent your main job is to keep your child safe.
Our office will be filing charges against Nick Reiner, who is accused of killing his parents, actor-director Rob Reiner, and photographer-producer Michelle Singer Reiner.
To understand how things reached this point, investigators revisited the night that may have triggered everything: Conan O'Brien's annual Christmas party. The event was known as one of Hollywood's warmest, most relaxed gatherings. Rob and Michelle were regular guests, but that year was different. They brought Nick along because they were worried about him and didn't want to leave him alone. Nick wasn't originally invited, but Rob explained the situation to Conan, who immediately welcomed him. At first, everything seemed normal, but Nick stood out. While guests laughed and mingled, he lingered in the background, hoodie pulled tight, eyes darting around the room. His energy felt off. Several guests later said Nick approached them abruptly, asking strange and intrusive questions like, "What's your full name?" and "Are you famous?" His stare was flat, unsettling. Actress Jane Fonda later said she felt a chill when he stood too close, staring without blinking. The tension peaked when Nick interrupted a private conversation between Bill Hader and another guest. When asked to give them space, Nick stood silently before storming off. The mood shifted instantly. The party never fully recovered. As the night went on, Michelle tried to smooth things over, though her worry was obvious. Rob followed Nick discreetly, trying to keep the situation from escalating. Witnesses described Nick as detached, confused, muttering to himself, barely touching his drink. Later, Rob gently placed a hand on Nick's shoulder and asked if he was okay. Nick didn't respond. By around 10 p.m., Michelle told a friend she wanted to leave. An argument broke out, not loud, but intense. Nick accused his parents of talking about him. When Rob tried to calm him, Nick pushed past, knocking over a table of drinks. Security stepped in, and Conan tried to de-escalate. Outside, Nick paced angrily, hands shaking, before getting into the car. The family left early. What seemed like an uncomfortable moment would later mark the beginning of their final hours. Neighbors later reported hearing muffled arguing around midnight. Nothing unusual, until morning turned the Reiner home into a crime scene that shocked Hollywood. Investigators believe the confrontation continued after they returned home. Sometime between midnight and dawn, Nick entered the master bedroom where his parents were sleeping. What followed was described as extreme and violent. Friends later said Rob and Michelle had believed Nick was improving. Rob had even talked about starting a new creative project together. By the next afternoon, the news spread rapidly. Tributes poured in. Shock turned to grief. Then focus shifted to Nick, his addiction, his mental health, and the warning signs people may have missed. Psychologists called it a perfect storm of trauma, addiction, and emotional instability. Hollywood insiders admitted they'd seen Nick's behavior before, but dismissed it. Now it couldn't be ignored. Nearly a year later, the case still dominates headlines. Every new detail reopens wounds. What was meant to be a joyful holiday night became the backdrop for one of Hollywood's darkest tragedies, a reminder that fame and fortune don't shield anyone from darkness. The story of Rob and Michelle Reiner isn't just about violence. It's about a family that fought for years to save their son. And the haunting question remains, in their final moments, did they realize that love alone was no longer enough? We may never fully understand what happened that night, but we can remember the humanity, the love, and the lives that existed before everything fell apart. This is Forever Fame TV. What are your thoughts on the Reiner family tragedy? Do you think the warning signs were missed? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share for more real Hollywood stories as this case continues to unfold.
I kind of knew that I wanted to relapse, basically.